I've searched on the internet and found some interesting articles about Sir Thomas Boleyn and Hever Church. So I'm going to go through those in this episode, just compiling everything together and see what else we can find out. So I do not think that the brass of Thomas Boleyn was made in 1538-9. I just don't believe it. And I'm trying to prove or disprove that theory, which obviously is what we need to do when we have a theory. So on the internet, let's have a look at what I found. I'm going to start with this image here on, I don't know whose collection is this. This is on the Illinois collections of a brass rubbing of Thomas Boleyn or Boleyn here. This has got on it that it's 1539, Common Era, on exhibit. So this is on display, these two images on the wall. You can see here though that they have put the inscription at the bottom of it, as it would be on lots of brasses, but we know that actually this is actually at the head and it's round the other way. We'll look at that some more, but obviously just for display they've put it up this way. Now they're saying here that I think combined together it's 2 meters long, but I'm just interested in what they're saying about the description of the brass, so let's have a look at that. So this is from Horowitz 2002. I don't know who that is, but anyway. 2 striking features of this brass catch the eye. The first is the elaborate tilting helmet with a falcon placed at the pinnacle, the crest of the Bullen family. The second is the full robes of the Order of the Garter with the insignia attached to the left shoulder, the collar of the Order of the Garter itself on the left knee. Only one other brass in England depicts the full costume of the Order, that of the Earl of Essex in 1483. He apparently died at his manor house of Hever in Kent on the 13th of March 1539. His tomb inscription states 1538 in Arabic numerals, and it's the old style of dating. I'm just interested in the only other person who is depicted in the order. Let's just have a look at that brass, just so we can see what it looks like. This is them here. This is his wife and him. So this is from 1483, so he died quite a long time before, Thomas Boleyn. You're talking like 50 years or so older than his alleged date of his brass. It's not very clear. Is that a better version of it? Oh, here we go. There is a page on this. His brass from Little Easton. Let's have a quick look. It's not a great copy, is it, of it? But you can get the idea. Similar display, isn't it? He's got a coat of armour on though on his hands in this one. So his hands are covered by metal. You can see the garter in the corner here, which we know from the brass of Thomas Boleyn is the same. Okay, so that's fine. So let's just move on going through these other articles. Parishes, Hever. The History and Topographical Survey of the County in Kent, Volume 3. Okay, so this is about Thomas Boleyn, who became a man of eminent note in the reign of King Henry VIII. He died in the 30th of the same reign, possessed of this castle. On the death of the Earl of Wiltshire, without issue male, who lies buried in this church under an altar tomb of black marble, on which is his figure, as large as the life in brass, dressed in the robes of the Garter. The king seized on this castle and these manors in right of his late wife, the unfortunate Anne Boleyn, the earl's daughter, who resided there. Is, as far as I know, the first reference to the brass and the tomb. There might be earlier references. This is what I want to try and find out, because this is saying in 1797, who lies buried in this church under an altar tomb of black marble, on which is his figure, as large as the life in brass, dressed in the robes of the Garter. Who lies buried in this church under an altar tomb of black marble. Okay, alright, so that is from 1797. That's interesting. Okay, there is this website on the TudorTrail.com, retracing the steps of Anne Boleyn, an immortal queen. So this has got about St Peter's Church, Hever, a picture of the church there, which we're very used to seeing now. And I don't know if this is just an engraving of the brass or whether it looks a bit like a drawing, doesn't it? But anyway, Dennis Foster, in his guide to St Peter's Church, describes the tomb in great detail. On the tomb is a very fine brass showing Sir Thomas in the robes of a knight of the Garter. Notice the badge of the Garter on the left breast, which we've seen here. The Garter round the left knee, the collar of the Order of the Garter, this, and the falcon. What, is that there? The crest of the Bullen family above the right shoulder. Of the Bullen family above the right shoulder. Well, this is his right shoulder, isn't it? You can see the garter there around his knee. Sir Thomas's tomb is located in the Bullen Chapel, added to the original church in the middle of the 15th century. Most of the glass in the church is modern, with possibly some old glass surviving in the Bullen Chapel. Now, he's not actually buried in the Bullen Chapel, though, is he? Because if we go to my videos, just so we can see, this is my just Google Drive. God, it was such a sunny day when I went there with me and my sunglasses. Look, I wished I'd taken my good quality camera, but it was just done on my phone, this. There is the line of the columns here. And so the tomb is sort of not properly in the chapel. It's like to the side, isn't it? Which is interesting. Anyway, okay. But what's interesting is here we've got the book from 1797, The History and Topographical Survey of the County of Kent, Volume 3, which we looked at earlier. But they've also got here The History of Tunbridge Wells by Thomas Burr on page 188. So can we see that from 1766? Right, there we can. Hever. Oh, The History of Tunbridge Wells, 1766. Okay. Hever is situated a mile further westward. This was anciently part of the extensive patrimony of Sir Stephen de Penchester. Okay, fine, blah, blah, blah. Right, let's have a look at the next one. Oh, till it was purchased by Geoffrey Bullen, this gentleman's grandson, the famous Sir Thomas Bullen, Knight of the Garter and father of the celebrated and unfortunate Queen Anne Bullen, constantly resided here and lies buried in Hever Church under a large and fair altar tomb with his effigy in brass and with a fair inscription. Right, so this is the first reference we have got to this brass. 1766. There doesn't seem to be anything else earlier than that, according to this really helpful website. Well, that is interesting, isn't it? What a shame. I wonder if just that booklet is here by that Dennis man. Is it online as well here? St Peter's Church, Dennis Foster, page 1. Oh, it is here as well. This is what we looked at previously. I'm just interested just to review where he got his information from. There's the brass of Thomas. This is just saying it's just one of only 2 brasses of him in that outfit. Let me just... Okay, but that is really helpful, isn't it? This is why the internet is just so amazing, isn't it? When I started family history research in the 1990s, you didn't have all these things, and now it's just... everything's at your fingertips. Just amazing. All right, so 1766 is the first reference to it on the tomb. Then I've got this article here from kentarchaeology.org.uk, which is about St Peter. Under the eastern arch, between the chapel and the chancel, is the very worn Purbeck marble tomb chest of Sir Thomas Bullen, which stands on the old floor level. We know the floor was raised in the 1890s. The chapel is covered by a slightly strange 4-canted purlin roof. But it's not actually in the chapel, is it? It's very, very... It's a very worn Purbeck marble tomb chest. This is on the Tudor Trail as well, from 2014, post by Natalie, saying that an artist recently sent 2 beautiful silkscreen prints of the monumental brasses. So just giving the description, here lieth Sir Thomas Bullen, Knight of the Order of the Garter, Earl of Wiltshire and Earl of Ormond, which deceased the 12th day of March in the year of our Lord, 1538. The Order of the Garter was founded in 1348 during the reign of Edward III and is dedicated to the image and arms of St George as England's patron saint. The crest, the motto, Oniswaki Mali Ponce, which means shame to him who thinks evil of it. So this says here, by the 16th century, when the brass described here was created, brass engraving had lost much of its earlier beauty and simplicity. with extensive shading added to give the illusion of depth. In his book, The Picture Book of Brasses in Gilt, Henry Trivik describes the brass of Sir Thomas as an excellent descriptive brass, but a dull, overworked engraving. It is nevertheless an impressive image. Right, but my point is I don't really think brasses in the 1530s had all this shading on the faces. I don't think they did. This is why I think there's something wrong. Right, now there is this website now to Kirsten Claydon Yardley, Tudor historian, author and researcher, and she has put up, I think it's not that long ago, is it, in 2022, this spotlight on Thomas Boleyn, Earl of Wiltshire, and she's written a whole article about Thomas. And you can see here in this picture that they've taken, you can see this really worn, battered old tomb with these bricks. And as I've said before, I'd love to know the date of these bricks, if anyone could date when it was maybe repaired, because it just seems very strange. So worn, so battered. You can see on the corner there part of the edge of the top slab being less worn. But what is going on here? You know, how is this tomb so worn and battered, but the brass on top is so pristine? And you can just see here the tomb here of his son here, just right next to him. As we'll see a bit later, the floor was raised. So I'm just assuming that these graves were just raised where they were. That's what I'm assuming. I don't know for sure. But the child here was buried not in the Bullen Chapel, but in the chancel by the altar, which sort of reminds me of when in Westminster Abbey you would have the tombs of Princess Elizabeth, daughter of Henry VII, and Princess Margaret, daughter of Edward IV, who were buried right near the Confessor's Chapel, originally sort of on the steps, so nearest the holiest place. But so he's not in the Bullen Chapel, which is interesting. So Kirsten Claydon Yardley is just giving some backgrounds to his life. That is fine, right? We know that his daughter, his only child who survived him, because Anne Boleyn was beheaded, her brother George was beheaded at the same time for incest. So Mary Boleyn died in 1543. No one knows where she was buried. So it just makes you think, is she the one who's supposed to have put up this brass? Because Thomas obviously couldn't have put an inscription on himself, because he'd be dead. He wouldn't know what date he died on. So is it Mary Boleyn who did this? Within those 4 years? Allegedly? So Kirsten is saying Thomas Boleyn is buried in the church of St Peter in the village of Hevac. We know this. The chapel on the north side of the chancel was added in the mid-15th century. This chapel is known as the Boleyn or Bullen Chapel. Thomas Boleyn's tomb is located under the arch between the chapel and the chancel. What I want to know is, when did the chapel start being known as the Boleyn Chapel? Is it actually of the time, or has it been named this later by someone else? That's what I would like to know. There might be a record somewhere that says it, but was it at the time or was it later? Yeah, so they've got some nice pictures here. Again, of the church. There's Margaret Cheney here, and then the tomb's just over here. This bit in this corner that we've looked at is the Boleyn Chapel. And then the interior of the church with the Boleyn Chapel just visible through the arches. So we've got the tomb here. I mean, and it is true, like often with tombs of people, they would be buried in arches like this. Because often you see all extensive designs and things above, don't you? So, and to be buried near the chancel, I guess that's what he would have wanted, presumably, to be nearest the holiest part of the church. But it still doesn't explain why the tomb is so battered. I'd love to really see this end of the tomb and see how battered it is out there. I don't think I really felt it or had a look. But looking at that, the end bit's been cut off, hasn't it? I can't remember. I need to have another think about this. Compared with the memorials of many of his contemporaries, Thomas Boleyn's tomb is relatively underwhelming. It's a tomb chest of Purbeck marble with a brass laid on the top rather than a sculptural effigy. The brass depicts the full figure of a man in armour with his head resting on his helm and his feet on a beast, in this case a griffin, a fairly typical representation of noblemen in the 15th and 16th centuries, and he's shown wearing the robe and collar of the Order of the Garter. That's the top of it there. I mean, but just look at this battered old stone. It's just odd that it would have been laid in this older tomb chest. It's really odd. Right, the top of the tomb with the inlaid brass, and we can see again this face that we've seen a lot before. We can see all this shading on the neck, all around the face, down the nose, around the eyes, all down the hands, and I do not think this is characteristic of a brass of this time, in my view. And there's other things, just the way the hands are placed, these open hands like this, they're not like this, they're like this. I think that just looks a bit different as well. There's just something is not right about this. Right. Whilst the brass itself is high quality work for the 16th century and is well preserved, it is high quality work. That's why I don't think it's from the time it was done, anyway. While the brass itself is high quality work and is well preserved, the tomb chest is badly weathered and has been crudely repaired with brick. Although they are worn, canopied niches, now empty, can be made out along the sides of the chest. Curiously, the style of these niches appears to be more 15th century than 16th century. For example, it bears some resemblance to the tomb of Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, from 1489. It is possible that an early memorial was reused for Boleyn, something that was not unheard of in the aftermath of the dissolution of the monasteries. Well, that is true, but it still feels weird. There's this great thing here where you've got the tomb of Thomas, and they've just done a sliding picture, so you can see it here, and then they've used this tomb here. But I can see there's something else here. So you've got an arch, and then there's a wider gap between the arches here. And on the end, there's a coat of arms here. So I can see sort of the general similarities, but I think there are some differences too. But I really like the whole way you can slide it like that, just to get a bit of an idea about what this may have looked like. Another unusual feature of the tomb is that it is set below the current floor level of the chapel and the chancel. It is clear that the floors in the church have been raised, and the decision must have been made to not attempt to lift the tomb to the new level. And we know that that happened in the 1890s, because there's evidence for that. You just see the tomb here, look, those bits are less worn there. Then they're just talking about the inscription here and the date, which we've already looked at. Now, there's something else about this inscription that we're going to come to look at again. I want to find other monumental brass engravings for inscriptions that are written in this style of writing and that are not written in that more traditional style of writing, in the same as the brass of Margaret Cheney, because this to me looks later. And it's got a border around it. It's got these rather memorable shaped sides. There's this little inscription on the plaque as well that is there. And the other thing that's just making me think about this is the W's. It's how the W is formed. And also this rather interesting H. Because the H goes along, drops down and goes along. And even though that's the first letter here, so it's slightly bigger, we can see on the other H's that happens too. So I want to see if I can find any lettering like this on other brasses for the period. Because to me, I'm expecting it to look the same design as Margaret Cheney, and indeed the brass of his son, because this is Margaret Cheney's here, you can see this kind of style of writing, which is what I'd expect it to be in, but it's not. It's like this, another thing that makes me think it's from a later date. This is also talking about where is the other members of his family buried. It's talking about his wife Elizabeth, who died the year before him in 1538 and was buried in St Mary's Church, Lambeth. So she's buried there. We don't know where Mary Boleyn is buried, it's unknown. There was a brass to an infant son of Thomas, Henry in St Peter's Church. but there were no other members of his family commemorated or known to be buried at Hever.